like to take you back to the discussions that we had in the class. And I remember you talking about your struggles and the challenges of having this multicultural identity. So do you want to talk a little about that?
Yeah, so I mean, basically there's this term called third culture kid, and it refers to anyone who kind of grew up in a place that wasn't really like, where they're from. So for example, like I spent the majority of my childhood in places that weren't India, and like multiple places. So it wasn't even just like one other place, it wasn't like one story of immigration or whatever. So yeah, so like the word is then third culture kid because basically you're, neither here nor there. And you're kind of like stuck in the middle and you're always kind of trying to negotiate where you belong and trying to fit in into like all those different spaces. And it is a lot harder than it looks on the outside, especially to people, like in my experience at least, especially like when I've lived in India, like a lot of the people that I've like interacted with think that I've had it very easy and think that I've led like a very privileged life, like a very simple life, like with no problems. And in terms of like materials and resources, I definitely did have a very privileged life. But in terms of like the emotional or like psychological or like social aspects of it, so there's this one side of me that's always like, oh, like I feel so bad because like I don't have, any childhood friends that I've lived in the same colony with for like 20 years, like a lot of my friends have, or like I don't have like, those long like relationships, or like I don't have, like a shared understanding of what it means to be like a kid living in Delhi or like growing up in Delhi or whatever. So one part of me is always kind of like, like mourning like the loss of that childhood that I could have had and like a shared understanding that I could have had. But then the other side of it is like the fact that I am so privileged and that I had such a privileged background, like makes it really hard to even be able to like, actually feel sad about it, because a lot of people are like, oh, you have nothing to be sad about, and like why do you get so upset like if we say, like a lot of people, like especially the first or second time they meet me, and like because I look pretty desi and then I open my mouth and then they're like कि oh इतना accent क्यों झाड़ रही है या फिर like इतना accent मार के क्यों बोलती है, and like I don't know how to describe that, like this is not something that I chose, and like wait, so like here people think this is like kahin bahar ka accent hai, but like if I speak to like someone bahar ka, they're like, oh, this is such an Indian accent, and like you're always kind of just lost in the middle. And that's just like a really difficult balancing act that you're always doing, and yeah, it's just hard to like find like a place where you truly belong. So I think that's like the challenge basically that's always there.
This one point that you made about third culture person, if we apply a gender lens to that, an intersectional one, if I were to ask you like a question, is it easier than for a male gender, or is it tough for other genders other than male gender when it comes to third culture person?
I think so, to a large extent, and I mean that has a lot to do with like how cultures place women at the like women are at the center of a lot of cultures, especially in the Indian context, and we place so much value on women's bodies and like women carrying on their cultures, and like there's a lot of expectations that they are supposed to deal with even when they're in different cultures. So since this is what I did my research on, like almost all of the participants agreed that as women we had a lot more scrutiny, and we were definitely like there was a lot more surveillance over our activities when we were in foreign countries. So for example, so I mean even in India, like we know that brothers are allowed to do a lot more than their sisters are at times, but even when you kind of like take us out of that context, because in the Indian context it's like, oh, like the neighboring auntie will see you, or like, oh, like this relative will get to know that you were out, and you don't have those fears when you're outside, right? Because like your society isn't there to like keep a check on you, but then families keep a stronger check on you because there's no society to keep check on you. So then so for example, a lot of the times like the boys are allowed to date white people, like they can have like white girlfriends of like whatever culture they're in, like they can have they can date people from those cultures. But for Indian women, it's like a lot more pressure to like kind of either not date at all or to only date other Indians in that school, or like kind of stay within your community lines, like stay within your social boundaries. And so definitely I think that plays like a big role in terms of how we end up navigating a lot of like the rules or like a lot of the cultures of the society that comes along with it, whether that's regard to like drinking or like partying or like just like, you know, dating or even like having like sleepovers and stuff, there's just like a lot more, yeah, like a lot more scrutiny placed on women, whether they're in India or whether they're Bahar.